why John Stossel is mistaken about Venezuela. Today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
Today I'm reacting to John Stossel. He is a journalist. I believe he has a particular right-wing libertarian bias, political bias, point of view. Very good for him, nothing against him. He has worked in several platforms like ABC in the United States, also in Fox Business, also in other places like Fox News, and right now he works, I believe, in Reason TV. That is a libertarian right-wing platform. He made a video in 2019, I have to be fair, about the situation of Venezuela, and it's called Venezuela is Socialist. And that's the title of the video. I'm making this video because particularly he replied something on Twitter, on X, I'm sorry, and Elon Musk replied to that particular tweet in X, and that was recently. I already made a video reaction regarding why Elon Musk is mistaken about Venezuela. Today, I have to react why John Stossel is mistaken about Venezuela as well. The video has so many mistakes, so many errors that I don't know where to start. Okay, first, let's mention the couple things that they got right. And of course, this video is not made out of a blue. That particular video says, of course, there are a lot of troubles in Venezuela, particularly back then. It was in 2019. And of course, at the moment, still today, the buzzwords about Venezuela was about the situation on 2017. And don't get this wrong, Venezuela, indeed, there was a big crisis back then, and still on a lesser degree. We have some of those issues, some of those today on 2024, but back then the situation was dreadful. I mentioned on this particular platform a lot of times that 2017 was an awful year to be in Venezuela, and that was the rock bottom of the Venezuelan economy and Venezuela society overall, a bunch of social turmoil. The economic crisis was awful. Back then, we had hyperinflation. We do not have hyperinflation back then. Also, I have to mention that the issues like the quote-unquote socialist communist policies that they were applied back then by the Venezuelan government, price controls, capital controls, currency controls, and a lot of aggressiveness against the private sector. These things are not the issue today. Also, we had a lot of scarcity and a lot of deficiency regarding the public infrastructure and the public services and so on, that we have some of those issues today regarding the infrastructure of the public services, but they have improved. I have to say that still they are not near to being perfect. Very good. But right now, unlike those days when we have a lot of scarcity of basic goods and services, food, medicine, and that kind of stuff, today they are mostly covered. The issue right now is that back then it was a supply side crisis. Right now it's a demand side crisis. So you go to every supermarket, every pharmacy, every drugstore, every store, they are fully packed, fully stored, fully shelved. And the issue right now is the prices, and I discussed many times why Venezuela went from being so cheap just a few years ago, of course, with a lot of scarcity, and right now Venezuela is expensive for Latin American standards. Not Dubai, it's not Switzerland, or anything like that, but it's expensive for Latin America. However, we have supply of basically every good and service that you might need in the country. Okay, the first mistake about the video, and overall the video is very basic. Doesn't get into the details about economics and so on. Back then, we had hyperinflation, but that's it. There is not any economic analysis or political analysis. It's basically just 5 minutes. I believe the video is running, saying socialism is bad, socialism is bad, socialism is bad. And at the end, a phrase of one of my favorite economists, Ludwig von Mises, that says, and quote, "The champions of socialism promise a garden of Eden, but plan to transform the world in a systematic post office. I wish progressiveness understood that. Well, basically, this particular video starts using this very basic analogy, saying that Venezuela is a very rich country regarding natural resources, especially oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves of crude oil in the world, but also has a lot of metals and precious metals and diamonds, and also it's a beautiful country. And if you follow my platform, you already know that. But it's poor because we have socialist governments, and it's not exactly the case. First, I mean, these particular people, especially from the West, and especially on right-wing platforms, and that's why I say beware of political biases when you're dealing about anything, but in this particular case, Venezuela. They basically said that the Venezuela was perfect, it was a rich country before the Chavismo arrived, and it's not the case. And also that the socialism arrived with the Chavismo. That is not the case. I explained this many times. That's why I don't like this simplistic explanation that everything was great and socialists do not exist before the Chavismo, and that was not the case. In order to answer particularly to John Stossel, Venezuela, I always have to explain, in the 50s, we had a right-wing dictatorship that on the economic side was quite good, but with a lot of corruption and mismanagement and so on. But they took care of the economy. It was some social issues that they were not good. Okay, that's why he was removed from power, this particular right-wing dictator. Very good. Afterwards, we have a period of 40 years of democracy that is known as the Fourth Republic. Basically, one different president for an administration of 5 years each. Very good. During the 60s, this particular cohort of presidents basically maintained kinda the same economic model, but with more social freedom. Also, I have to mention this particular right-wing dictatorship was, according to the definition of American right-wing people and right-wing politicians, it was a socialist as well, because there were a lot of social welfare programs. Same thing during the Fourth Republic. We had free healthcare, some housing, not free housing for everybody, but some housing, free college tuition. Of course, we have always both the public option and the private option for healthcare and education. So basically, everything runs smoothly, say the least, during the right-wing dictatorship that also had social welfare programs. Venezuela was actually a top 5 country regarding GDP per capita, but also that has to do mostly because on the 50s, that was right after World War II, and most of the rich nations were impoverished back then, like basically every European economy, Japan, and so on. So Venezuela was, the only competition regarding the wealthiest country in the world back then was the US, Canada on a lesser degree, Switzerland, and a couple of other nations. That's it. Okay. Following on the 60s, same economic model that was quite good, but with social welfare programs, like I mentioned, those have been there throughout the whole Venezuelan history. And then on the 70s, we had the situation in worldwide, the Yom Kippur War, that Israel, a war with their Middle Eastern neighbors, and most of the OPEC, this particular institution that controls the production of crude oil on the oil producers, most of the OPEC members are Middle Eastern, except for Venezuela and a couple others. Venezuela is one of the founding members of OPEC with Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Anyways, they decided, since, they were outraged by back then the war situation with Israel and so on, and of course, Western nations, especially the United States, were backing Israel. The OPEC nations, the Middle Eastern OPEC nations, they decided an embargo on Western nations, and the price of crude oil sky jumped back then. There again, put the graphic. Venezuela back then was very close, not only with the Middle Eastern nations, but also with the Western nations, especially the United States. Excellent diplomatic relationships. And they said, you know what, I'm going to cover the bill. And back then, it was like 3-4 times the price of crude oil, skyrocket back then. And during the 70s, Venezuela was very rich, thanks to this, because it was the most important oil producer in the world. On those days, in the 70s, Venezuela was known as the Saudi Venezuela. Back then, Venezuela was a top 10 country regarding GDP per capita, the standards of living were excellent, and so on, with a lot of social welfare programs, by the way. However, the issue was, on the late 70s, these politicians from the Fourth Republic, they were social democrats, by the way, mentioned this a couple of times, but still, kind of coherent regarding foreign policy and that kind of stuff. Very good. But they were populist, they increased the public spending. Also, they were not aggressive against the public companies because they treated well the good, well-connected private companies. So many of the private companies were in bed with these social democrats, so a lot of corporatism that happens a lot, both on the left-leaning governments and the right-wing government. So beware on that if you are a right-winger, and so don't take a political bias because these people are not, they don't have your back. Anyway, well, what happened back then is that the Venezuelan government, there was a lot of corruption, talking on the 70s and the 80s. So these particular social democrats, they put a lot of tariffs and make very difficult in order to have imported goods in the country that they not compete with the Venezuelan ones, the ones, with the companies that they were in bed with the government. So that was bad for the Venezuelan economy, very bad. Back then it was very, very, very expensive to see goods and services from abroad. Very good. So basically in the 80s, after this massive public spending, and also with this corporatism that we had on the Venezuelan economy, and on the 80s we had a sudden drop of the standards of living. And on the 90s were, bad for the Venezuelan society overall, a lot of violence and social turmoil. The crime rate rise significantly. That's why Hugo Chavez came into power. And afterwards, Hugo Chavez, I'm not on either side of the aisle. Basically, his economic management was awful. He kept the social spending, but it's not like he started the social spending, the government spending, and the social welfare. He basically made it his own version, but was basically not the same thing, but was different. A lot of corruption with PDVSA. That's the big thing, something I have to explain. That the party here in Venezuela, 90% of GDP historically has been tied to the oil industry. The main issue with Chavez, here's the main issue, putting aside all of the politics and nonsense and socialism, that kind of stuff. Two things. Since the Venezuelan economy is very tied to the oil revenue that comes to the country, that particular side was very mismanaged. First, he fired a lot of the top talent on the oil industry on 2002, 2003, and was replaced for people that were more inept but loyal to, the Chavismo. That's one thing. Because before that, it was a strike of the oil workers, that they were not with Chavez and so on. A lot of political mumbo jumbo. And afterwards, the president of PDVSA that was named on the mid-2000s was Rafael Ramirez. I mentioned this particular guy a couple of times. He's a very corrupt human being. I cannot even call it a man. Anyway, right now he's in Italy, having with all of the money that he stole via corruption worldwide, so it's very happy over there. And basically, he destroyed the Venezuelan oil industry. Venezuela used to produce 3 million barrels of crude oil per day and went to on a bottom of 400,000. Right now, we are at 800,000. Very good. So it's a lot of corruption and a lot of mismanagement. On the particular video of John Stossel, he mentions that everyone that explains this, he says they only blame mismanagement. And it's not, of course, not only mismanagement, but it's a great deal of mismanagement, because if you take care of business on the oil sector, then you can do everything regarding socialism and politics and so on. This is a particular case of Venezuela. I'm not, pro-socialism or anything like that. Don't put me in any political group because I don't like politics at all. And when Maduro arrives to the power, he kept the same policies of Hugo Chavez on 2013 because, of course, he was loyal to Hugo Chavez and he didn't want to know piss off the other people in power and so on. So he kept the same policies, the quote-unquote social policies, but with the destruction of the oil sector on the back end. He wasn't noticing, as far as I know. In 2017, is when the whole situation manifests. Before that, it was, of course, a steady lagging of and dropping of the standards of living of the average Venezuelan with scarcity and so on, and that totally happened, don't get me wrong. And of course, the future for younger people, that's why you saw a lot of, you're still seeing a lot of migrants, Venezuelan migrants all over the world, because they felt that there was no future for the country back then. And I totally respect that. However, that was the bottom, 2017, and that's when Maduro became famous and the socialists and so on. But right now, the Maduro administration has a little bit shifted regarding their economic policy. I'm talking the economic policy. I'm not talking the politics. That's another thing. Regarding economics, the Maduro government, since 2018, they lifted the price controls, capital controls, currency exchange controls. He's more pro-private businesses. He's more pro-investing in the country and the non-oil economy, but still trying to do some deals on the oil economy. So the tendency right now since 2018 is consistent GDP growth, but still a long way to go after that 80% GDP collapse between 2013 and 2018. Other thing that I have to mention is regarding socialism. It's according to a recent poll that I saw a couple months ago, 87% of Venezuelans hate socialism. Now, going back with John Stossel's remarks about the Venezuelan economy in this particular video, it has no analytic value, doesn't have any particular arguments besides just socialism is bad, socialism is bad, socialism is bad, and is basically a useless piece of content in order to try to understand Venezuela. The only value that this particular video has is try to discourage Americans in order to vote for politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders or people like that, progressive progressive left-leaning politicians. Also, I have to mention, I mentioned this a bunch of times, if you are from the US and you like the politics and so on, the Venezuelan politicians, I'm talking the Chavismo ones, the left-leaning guys, they are not the same thing as the left-leaning progressive politicians in your own country that mostly are Democrats, of course. They are not the same thing. They are not progressive. They don't care about woke culture and LGBTQ. I don't remember the acronym. I'm going to put it here on the platform. Anyways, and it's not the same thing. So they are trying. This is something that is very simplistic and I despise, and that's why I have to make these particular reactions, is that these particular politicians is not the same thing what happened to Venezuela, what it might happen with the United States in the future. Of course, you always have to be vigilant regarding electing terrible politicians, both on the left and the right. By the way, I'm on neither side. So basically, this particular piece of content is worthless. I'm sorry. I know John Stossel is a very big deal and a very important journalist or something. But regarding journalism, economics, politics, that kind of stuff, this particular piece of content is just political propaganda, but right-wing libertarian political propaganda, but it is what it is. I'm not saying I hate right-wing and libertarian politics or anything like that. I'm a pragmatic. I see what it is, not what I want to happen. That's why I don't like politics at all. Anyways, you should get this as an useful, valuable information about Venezuela. Absolutely not. That comes from a Venezuelan born and raised. And lastly, I'm going to close the video with this particular thought. I know socialism and socialist policies and so on have brought terrible results. However, that doesn't mean that you have to sign a blank check to these particular right-wing politicians that they have their own interests. They still raise taxes. They are bureaucrats. They put a lot of hurdles in order to achieve economic prosperity. They are different than the left-leaning ones, I have to say this. But at the end of the day, these people only answer to corporate media and big donors and billionaires and so on. So they don't want the best for all people. Politicians are, they are what they are. And that's why I don't have a particular bias, because I simply don't trust politicians at all, regardless of the country, regardless of their political bias and so on. So keep that in mind, and please have critical thinking abilities and reach a conclusion for yourself.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again, and have a nice day.